And great to have you in the chat. So let's get started. I wasn't sure what to call this session, like Satya and Ahimsa in everyday life, or truthful, compassionate communications, something along those lines. We want to talk about practical strategies for kind and compassionate and truthful communications as we practice our yoga philosophies like Satya, truthfulness, and Ahimsa, non-harming, in our lives. And the reason for this discussion at this time is yesterday I was replying to a student's philosophy journal, and we were kind of talking back and forth about how do we really put truthfulness into practice? How are we honest with people without causing harm? And it got me thinking about some of the strategies that I've learned over the years that have helped me in my communications and in managing conflict. So regardless of where you are in your yoga teacher training course, we've all been learning somewhat about yoga philosophy, which can be so enlightening, but putting those ideals into practice in an everyday capacity can sometimes be a challenge as we're navigating all the interactions and challenges and communications of our busy and modern lives. So the focus for today is going to be on how we might explore how we can practice those philosophical ideals that we're learning in our everyday conduct and when managing conflict and when in conversation or relationship with the people around us. So I'm very interested to hear your insights and your experiences and your ideas. But also I'm going to share a few of the strategies I've learned over the years. And I've noted 5 of those. Listen, agree, ignore is the first. I'm not your person for that. Don't eat it if it doesn't taste good. What's true for me may not be true for you, and take some space. Before I dig into all that, a couple of notes. So a reminder, what are the yamas? The yamas are the first limb of the 8 limbs of yoga, and they offer us guidelines for social conduct, for how we treat others in relationship. And while we might also look at how we treat ourselves as a foundation for how we treat others, the primary aim of the yamas is for us to consider how we conduct ourselves in the spirit of yoga with consciousness and compassion as we inhabit the world together and inhabit spaces and connect with others. So our first yama is ahimsa, non-harming or non-violence. And this is a commitment that our thoughts, our speech, and our actions don't harm others. Satya is our second yama, truthfulness, and that's a commitment to tell our truth and also to understand others' truths and without harm. So those are kind of the first 2 yamas that we're really going to be focusing on in today's discussion. And as I was discussing with this student yesterday, I often think of the yamas as teachings that help us to overcome our more primal or immature urges, like a toddler who has an urge to just take what they want when it suits them, or lie when it suits them, or hit out when they're angry or frustrated. The yamas are a chance for us to evolve, to more consciously move through the world, and to consider in all of our interactions what our impact is going to be on others. So that's something to think about. And with that in mind, I'm often asked by students, what are some actual practical strategies to be more honest, to do less harm, to manage conflicts more gracefully and more kindly, without just avoiding conflict altogether or just becoming a hippie granola doormat, or worse, just avoiding people altogether, which is sometimes my own urge. Yeah. before we dig into that discussion, I just want to offer one more caveat. We're talking about the common conflicts and challenges that we face in everyday life with our families and our friends and our colleagues. We're talking about issues that, while they might cause us concern or be a bit distressing, they're not dangerous or traumatizing or illegal. If someone's causing you material harm, or you feel threatened or at risk of harm, that's not a time for yoga philosophy, except to use the philosophy of call for help, get out of there, report. Or perhaps in my examples this is more about conflicts, about like who opened a package with the sewing scissors, or whose turn is it to organize birthday cupcakes for a coworker, or how your in-laws criticize you, or how you criticize your in-laws. So the everyday kind of challenges that we face. One more thing before I begin, I have to admit that I'm not that great socially. I don't have strong social skills, and I'm still very much a beginner in a lot of situations, particularly when it comes to conflict. My first impulse is to let myself down rather than let someone else down, and to run and hide when there's a challenge. However, I have learned some strategies over the years that have served me well, that I thought I would share. Before we dig in, I wonder if there are questions. I am going to touch on the little white lies we tell, and maybe talk about when we might employ a different strategy than a lie, and when a little white lie is the kindest option or the option that best suits the social circumstance. Little white lies are sometimes socially beneficial, and everyone accepts that we know what this is, but this is the best thing for this environment right now. Yeah, but I will, after we've talked about some of the strategies, I'm interested to hear if you find that some of these strategies might be better than the white lies in some situations. Yeah. So we'll start with my first strategy, which I learned years ago from a yoga teacher in training, and it's called listen, agree, ignore. So how this works is I'll say how this works for me. When I'm faced with a challenging conversation where my impulse or my urge is to defend myself or to argue, this is a strategy that I've found really useful. So I'll give you an example. I had someone in my life who could be quite critical, and I would get my back up and want to argue or even sometimes lie about my real opinion or the situation just to get her to back down. And instead, listen, agree, ignore is like listening to the person's criticism or, idea and saying, that's an interesting perspective, and then just moving on. And it just kind of pours water on what could become a very fiery situation, right? It's especially useful if you know that a discussion or a dialogue won't change anyone's perspective or position. So listen, agree, ignore. That's an interesting idea. That's an interesting thought. And then just ignore it. Move on. Let them have their thought. You know your thoughts. You don't have to argue about it. What I like about the use of interesting is that it doesn't mean you agree. It just indicates that you're listening. And a lot of times that's what people are looking for. They're looking to be heard with whatever their idea or their belief or their criticism is. They're looking to be heard, to have their voice in the mix. So that's an interesting perspective. And then you can just move on. That saved me from a lot of arguments around family events. Listen, agree, ignore. My second strategy is I'm not your person for that. And I found this extremely useful. This is another strategy that I got from a yoga teacher in training. And this works for me really well because I am a bit of a hermit and I don't want to attend most things I'm invited to, but I'd love to be invited. Keep inviting me. I'm not coming. instead of making up white lies, which is my first impulse, oh, I've got something else on. Anyone who knows me really well knows I do not have something else on. I'm not attending anything. But instead of making up a white lie, I use this strategy to be honest and kind when I decline. So I might say, I'm not your person for going to a concert at 10 p.m., but would you like to take an afternoon walk this week with me? And this shows the person that you do want to spend time together, that you do value their friendship, but that concerts or whatever event is not the place for you. It's not comfortable for you. It's not suitable. It doesn't fit your lifestyle or your goals. And what I like about this strategy is that it can actually bring you closer in relationship, showing who you are as a person, and maybe even allowing you to create your own special events with that person that you both enjoy, right? So it could, rather than setting you apart, like you never want to do things with me, it can actually help to bring you together to find something that you're both your person for. Right? If you've never been a decliner like I am, maybe you've been on the receiving end of a lot of declining of invitations, you can start to feel like, I've invited this person to 4 things and they've said no, like, do they not like me? Yeah. And so this helps cut through that confusion. I like you. I want to spend time with you, but PM? No, it's not for me. You need to find a late night friend for that. I'm your person for, early mornings or afternoons or whatever. And, make a special event that you both really enjoy, that you both want to engage with. And that, again, that can actually help develop relationship rather than putting barriers in relationship. So that's the strategy. I'm not your person for that. My third strategy is don't eat it if it doesn't taste good. So if someone says or does something that hurts you or leaves a bad taste in your mouth, you can sometimes walk away from a conversation with someone going like, was I insulted? Did they say that? It's better to speak up early and to speak up clearly rather than lie that you're okay with their behavior. And you can use language that doesn't criticize, but is clear. Like, when you say that, it makes me feel, right? Or I'm a bit uncomfortable with that. Think of this as Satya and Ahimsa together, helping someone not cause harm to you and not cause harm to your relationship, and potentially not cause harm to others with behavior that is unkind or uncomfortable. And it's telling truth with clarity and kindness, right? Which not only can help in the moment, but can help keep your future communications with this person sweeter, to leave a sweeter taste in your mouth, right? So don't eat it if it doesn't taste good. Regardless of all the yoga philosophies that we talk about, you don't have to just absorb every comment or conversation or connection that you have with people. So if it tastes bad, send it back. Yeah, it's often not something that's overt. It's something subtle. So this is where I like to relate this to the, if don't eat it if it doesn't taste good. That, you're eating something, you're like, it's that flavor. It doesn't taste great. It's not the whole food. It's just like it's that taste. And for me, I found that whilst it's challenging for me, speaking up a little earlier, like, what's this taste? Like, is something happening here I'm not aware of? Is everything okay? I'm not sure what you're saying here. Getting people to repeat something or explain something in more detail when there is that undercurrent can help them understand that you're tasting that undercurrent. And if they're doing it intentionally, they're going to have to take it back, right? So is that, I'm not sure what's happening here, or, I'm not sure I'm hearing you clearly. Can you explain that? Forces them to be clearer and either say overtly the thing that they're trying to slide in there, or they can take it back and see that you see and you're willing to speak up. And it can be kind, and it can, it doesn't have to be challenging, but it can, the focus here is on bringing clarity to what's happening. I don't have good examples off the top of my head here. But I have had people in my life who you think you're having one conversation and then you walk away and go, wait a minute, that feel good after that conversation. Like, what's happening there? If you can bring more consciousness into the moment, you might be better able to speak up kindly about that flavor rather than just walk away and take it with you. Does that make sense? Any ideas on how you might do that? Practical things you might say in those situations? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Up an excellent point that so many of our communications these days aren't face-to-face. They're text, they're email, they're video chat, and it can be harder for us to communicate and interpret what's being communicated in those environments. And one strategy, and there's nothing wrong with just ignoring it and pretending that it's not there, but if it does leave a bad taste in your mouth, it might be worth clarifying. And when you clarify, you can always clarify with a focus on the best possible interpretation. So if someone texts you something and the interpretation could go a number of ways, you can clarify, you know, I got your text, I'm assuming you mean, and then the best possible interpretation, rather than texting back, I got your text and are you saying this? You can offer back what is the kindest and the most positive interpretation of what they've said. And then they can either clarify, yes, that's exactly what I meant, or they'll have to commit to the maybe less flavorful comment they were trying to make. Does that make sense? I think in these circumstances that it's easy to fall into the negative, and offering people the opportunity to either confirm or to shift to the kindest, most positive option of what they're trying to communicate could be a really nice way of maintaining positive communications and maintaining positive relationships. It can be very easy to misinterpret, especially things in a text or a comment on social media. Giving people the opportunity to look at it from the best possible angle with you could be a way of reducing harm and reducing negative interactions. I really like the way that you said that. It's holding people accountable and shining a light on what's happening. People might not even be aware of what they're saying, or it might be an unconscious behavior, or they really mean it. They really mean to feed you something distasteful and hope that you'll just eat it and not say anything. And at least in this way, you can kindly but clearly, like, I taste what you're feeding me. Let's talk about it, right? Without having to create a big conflict. So that's, don't eat it if it doesn't taste good. And don't feed people, to put ourselves on the other side of that, don't feed people distasteful things. If you have something to say to someone, a criticism or a conflict or feedback, say it clearly and honestly. That does the least harm, is to be clear and honest and compassionate with your communications. Yeah, okay, my fourth strategy, what is true for me may not be true for you. And this is increasingly important these days, especially with our communications on social media, and particularly because there can be some divisiveness, amongst friends, amongst family, amongst coworkers about beliefs, particularly, political beliefs these days. So what this strategy hopes to help us to do is understand that what is true for you, how you see things from your perspective and your experience, your belief system, your culture, your background may not be the same for others. And so some simple strategies to employ this is you might use language like, in my opinion. That's a strategy I've had to employ in my own household a number of times, that while we have this discussion, we're going to say, in my opinion, before we say anything, in my opinion. And it's helped. It makes us laugh every time. And it helped us to not feel like someone was pushing their belief onto the, like, here's how I see it from my perspective. How do you see it? So in my opinion, or what's relevant for me, or how I see it from my perspective. And you can use that when you're sharing an opinion or a belief with others. And what I find useful about this is not only does it reduce conflict and discord, but it can open up a dialogue and allow everyone in the conversation to maybe learn a little bit more about each other and maybe see things from multiple points of view, right? Rather than just standing your ground and saying, this is the only way that this can be seen, to maybe open up a discussion. Yeah, like imagine you're standing in a group and you're all standing in a circle looking at an object in the middle, right? The object stays the same. Your viewing point causes you to see the object differently, right? That's really easy to say when it's an object. When it's something that's a belief or an opinion or a principle that you hold dear, this can be a lot more challenging. So, and this is a place where I definitely fall into the arguing category more often than I would like to. So my aim is to try to pair this one with the listen, agree, ignore strategy. So, for example, I have someone in my life who quotes a lot of Facebook research that doesn't align with my truth. And I don't need to argue or criticize or reject this person's ideas, right? They're their ideas. It doesn't change things for me. So that's where I might practice listen, agree, ignore. So this person often says, well, science said this, and now it's saying that, they're always changing their minds. Like, yes, I agree. So there's your, I've heard you, I agree. Yeah, I agree. Science isn't always right. It's a process. It's about learning. Things might change with scientific inquiry. So it doesn't mean it was wrong. It means it was learning, just like we all are, right? And that can be a way of saying, I've heard you, I've heard your opinion. Here's how I see things from my perspective. And here we are together learning, right? I want to point out, in case you start thinking that I'm a wonderful person in these circumstances, I'm not. I still have a voice in my head that says, that's ridiculous, right? But it doesn't help to say that out loud all the time, right? They might be wrong, which is what I think, but I might be wrong. It's possible. It's happened. Most importantly, I might do harm to that relationship and harm any chance of finding common ground or learning together if I can't find a way to be compassionate in that situation and understand that as much as I hold my principles dear, they're holding their principles dear as well, and trying to find a common ground if it's possible. So that's what is true for me may not be true for you. You can say that thing out loud. That could be your strategy. I hear that that's true for you. It's not true from my perspective, but we have different truths, and that's okay, right? And then you can move on. Thoughts about that? when it comes to being in an environment where someone's saying something hateful, where someone's saying something harmful to a particular person or to a community, I don't have easy answers to this. And to my great regret, I have sat there in the past and not said anything because I didn't want to make people uncomfortable. But, you know, I was uncomfortable and other people were being harmed. Maybe not people right there in the space, but in general, people are harmed by hateful attitudes. So my hope is that I'll do better as I go on in finding a way to speak up in those situations that doesn't create an explosion, but maybe can shine light. So maybe this goes back to the don't eat it if it doesn't taste good strategy. Like, rather than letting yourself boil and then boil over and, you know, in the moment, like, oh, that sounds really unkind. Did you mean that? Like, oh, that's, you know, it's really unkind. Is that what you meant to say? And then they can clarify. And if that's a position that they hold dear, to be hateful towards another group of people, you know, then you have a choice to make about whether you're going to continue on that conversation. My hope is that I will have the strength to compassionately, but truthfully, stand in those situations as an ally for groups that are discriminated against, or people who are having hateful remarks made against them, that I can consciously but clearly say, that's really unkind. I don't like how you're talking about that. If you're anything like me, I can walk away from situations like that, and then that's in me. I'm tasting that for days. Oh, I should have said this. I should have said that. You don't have to in the moment, but if you have the ability and it's safe for you to do so, I think that those are opportunities where we can learn maybe to speak up. And it doesn't have to be a fight, and it doesn't have to become a big argument, but it can just be like, I see you, I see what you're saying, and it's not nice. Yeah. For me, and I don't know if anyone else can relate to this, but if I've been in many situations like this, and often it's places like the dog park where I do want to continue to have reasonable, polite acquaintanceship with the other humans there. I mean, if it could be all dogs, I'd be thrilled, but the humans have to drive them there. And I don't want there to be huge conflict between the humans. And I've stood there and not said anything while my brain's working overtime, and then got to a point where I've boiled over. And I think that sometimes maybe it's easier for everyone involved if you say something quickly rather than let it stew and then blow up. So something like, oh, that sounds really judgmental, or oh, that's kind of unkind. Did you mean that? And that can kind of put a stop to something that could become much bigger. Right? So this brings me to my last strategy, which is about taking space. In conflict situations, it can feel like things have to be said or done or resolved right now. But often we can come to kinder and more reasoned decisions with a little bit of time, right? Taking a little bit of time and space. So that situation that I was just talking about, that took time. That was a month-long project of what am I going to say when this comes up again, which it's bound to do. I took some time and thought about, do I want to make a speech? Like, do I want to say, I'm never talking to you again? Like, what am I going to do? So take some time and space with something, you know, in the moment. If someone's asking for or even demanding a response, you can verbally take time. That's a lot to consider. Or I hear you. Let me take some time with that and get back to you. Right? You've given me a lot to think about. and then you can walk away. You don't have to respond in the moment. Even if your final response is going to be, let's agree to disagree on this, or let's never talk again, or whatever your final response is going to be, you'll have had some time to reflect and to reason and to bring consciousness and compassion to the situation. And maybe the other person in the conflict has also used that time and space to reflect and maybe better understand your perspective. So when things are flaming up between you and someone else, you can take space. You can request, or even if you need to, demand space and time. I hear what you're saying. I'm going to need time to think about that. I'm going to need time to process that. Right? And then give yourself that time. Thoughts on that? In so many situations. Yeah. And just to give yourself some space, especially if it's something awkward, you know that you're going to say no, and it's hard to say no face to face. You can say, oh, you know what? Get some time to think about that. I'm going to drop you an email. And then you've got time to ponder, and then you can craft an email and send it off. And it doesn't have to be in the moment. And if someone's pressuring you in the moment, is it to your benefit to be pressured? Right? So you can ask for time and space. Does this come up for folks? Do you feel like you're pressured in the moment to respond or react or sign a contract or have a resolution to a problem, and you'd rather have time and space, but you haven't asked for it? I don't have anything productive to say right now. I don't have anything to add right now. Let me have some time to think about that. Right? Give yourself time and space. If someone's asking for a solution to a problem, I'm going to need to take some time with that. Did you have suggestions? So sending it back, right? These are all strategies that, whilst I have them in my toolbox, do I always remember I have them in my toolbox? Oh, no, definitely not. I want to talk about being honest about being a beginner in relationships. Even though I am of a certain age, I have to admit I'm still a real beginner in a lot of ways of communicating and connecting with other people. I haven't developed skills. I'm still using the skills of my teenage years. And I found that when I acknowledge that I have a lot to learn about communicating and relating to other people, particularly with those principles that I hold dear of the philosophies of yoga, when I could acknowledge that I was a beginner, I stopped giving myself a hard time about my clumsiness in social situations. And I allowed myself to get curious and begin to learn and develop some skills. So just like allowing yourself to be a beginner at anything, you could, I'm a beginner at yoga, or I'm a beginner at chess, I'm a beginner at tennis. You can let yourself be a beginner at honesty and non-harming. You can allow yourself to be a beginner at friendships or love relationships or colleague relationships. Acknowledging that you're learning and that it's a process can be a really good first start at developing your own strategies and not falling back on old habits or strategies that don't reflect who you are now and who you want to be, right? Or just, following your toddler impulses to take, to lie, whatever, right? In this way, allowing yourself to be a beginner lets you learn and experiment how you might manage communications and conflicts with more kindness and compassion and honesty. Just like in our yoga classes, we wouldn't like students coming along thinking that they need to be advanced at yoga on day one. We don't need to expect ourselves to be advanced at conflict resolution and relationship management when we haven't yet developed those skills or interrogated the strategies that we've already been employing, right? So that's my final thought on that. Let yourself be a beginner at bringing yoga philosophy into these social and work situations, and let yourself be a bit of a scientist and experiment with what works for you, what works in certain situations, what doesn't work for you. And that can make relationships a lot more interesting and a lot more compassionate and a lot more truthful. Are you asking like, how do we do it? Or like, how do we keep it front of mind? That's kind of what this discussion and the other discussions in our philosophy club are all about. How do we take these ideals on paper and things that feel good when, you know, I'm alone reading my philosophy texts and no one's bugging me? How do I take those philosophies and really use them in the real world when it's more difficult, when it would be easier to lie, or when it would be easier to say, oh, that's fine, and then leave, or not say anything in, you know, when someone's behaving bad. To put philosophy into practice is to bring it into all the situations of your life and see how and where and why it works for you, right? A couple of ways you can keep yoga philosophy at front of mind is to use your yama and niyama cards. So for those of you who haven't discovered them yet in your training portal, you can print them out and cut them into cards, or you can make your own, of course, and pick one every day and set it in front of your computer or on the bathroom mirror or the fridge or the dashboard of your car. And let that be the principle that guides you for that day. So when things come up, say maybe you're practicing santosha, contentment, and things come up that challenge your contentment, you can have a look at that. Why aren't I content here? Could I find contentment even though this is not my favorite situation? Or do I need to get out of this situation and find my contentment? You know, it gives you a chance to look at the world through the lens of that yama or niyama for the day or the week, however long you're going to do that, right? If you haven't done it already, dig into your yoga philosophy study unit. That gives you a chance to do just this, to take a yama or niyama for each week, take it out into the world. How does it show up? What's easy for you? What's challenging for you? What do you get? What do you not get? How might you relate it to this circumstance or this situation, or it helped you employ this strategy, right? And reflect on that at the end of the week. If you've done the yoga philosophy journaling, so, you know, for someone like Sun, maybe you've done that years and years ago, you can come back to it. It's something in my own practice that I come back to regularly because my viewing point is different now than when I first studied yoga philosophy. The philosophies of yoga, particularly the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, they're designed to be like a companion as you grow through life and they grow with you. They offer you a mirror to look at yourself and also a window to look out at the world. And the view is always changing, right? So it's something that you can come back to anytime. So those are a couple of ways that you can keep yoga philosophy front of mind. If you're teaching, share those yama and niyama cards with your students or theme your classes around the yamas and niyamas. It's educating your students and bringing yoga philosophy into their practice. And in preparation for theming a class around one of the yamas or niyamas, you're going to do maybe some reading and research, maybe lots of reflecting, maybe meditating, and that brings that back into your life front and center as well. I see I'm running out of time. So we're talking about some of these strategies for bringing yoga philosophy into our everyday lives. I want to thank you all for your contributions that were so insightful and useful. And thank you for your questions. For those of you who are here live, special thanks. For those of you who are listening to the recording, hello. I will look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you.